I want to talk with Michael Kaskey-Blomain about a lot of Sixers, Raptors, but I want to pick his brain on some NBA stuff, too. He covers the league as well. CBS Sports 24/7. Covers the Sixers for us. Lucky enough to be at Game 3. I will not be there tonight, unfortunately, Michael. But I know you will be there representing 97.3 ESPN.com and have plenty of insight on this game. Number one, I want to ask you, do you think the winner of Game 3 wins the series?
Man, you put me on the spot right off the bat, Mike. That's tough. I'm going to say no. I don't think it's odds-wise you would say probably, but I don't think it's necessarily a make-or-break game. I think both of these teams have enough talent and experience that, they'd be able to bounce back. Obviously, the Sixers, were able to go and win one in Toronto. Toronto is looking to do the same here in Philadelphia. But, either way, I expect this series to go, if not the distance, at least 6 games. So I think that, obviously whichever team wins tonight would have the advantage, especially if it's the Sixers, because then you're winning one in Toronto, 2 straight. You're building some nice momentum. But I do think that either team has, the fortitude, to bounce back either way.
See, for me, it's hard, Michael, for the Sixers, because if they lose tonight, which means they would have to win in Toronto twice, and almost would have to win. You're asking them then to either win 3 games in a row or win a Game 7 in Toronto. That's why for Philly, I think tonight is epic.
Yeah, Mike, it's definitely more important, I think, for the Sixers to win this game. It's going to be huge, obviously, the first game back in Philly. And like you said, it's tough to ask them to either win 3 straight or to win another one in Toronto. But, in the history of the NBA, for these teams, if this team is going to be as good as we want it to be, you have to overcome adversity. You have to, win on the road sometimes. You have to win in Game 7s in tough situations. So, yeah, it would definitely be an easier, a better path for the Sixers to win tonight. But, if this team is as good as I think they do have potential to be, it shouldn't break them if they, aren't able to walk away with the win.
Yeah, now, some of the things, let me ask you, all right, in Game 2, they made the adjustments. Siakam, they had Embiid, and there's some big numbers there that I'll bring up here in a minute. But that was a game changer, I thought. They kind of got undervalued a little bit about what kind of impact Embiid did have there. Ben on Kawhi, Harris on Gasol. We know that the Raptors are going to make some changes here. But, if you're Brett Brown and you're looking at the tape, what is something that he needs to do better tonight, even if he had a good game plan in Game 2, that he still needs to do better in Game 3?
I think the first thing offensively is he has to establish Joel, as a viable offensive option. And this doesn't necessarily come down to Brett. Some of it comes down to Joel, too, fighting for position and, making himself available for the ball. But, if the Sixers are going to win this series, I don't think they can rely on, Herculean performances from Jimmy Butler, like the one they got in Game 2. They're going to need more from Joel. They're obviously their superstar player to produce offensively. And defensively, I think that, he could tighten up. The Sixers got, there were some opportunities for the Raptors down the stretch of that game where they had open threes from the perimeter. Danny Green, looking back, I went back and watched the game again. There was 2 or 3 shots that Danny Green had in the final 5 minutes that are normal. Danny Green, you expect him to make. Jody Meeks had a wide open corner 3, and Kawhi had an open shot too that he missed in the final 2 minutes. So there was chances that the Raptors could have capitalized on that. I'm sure that once they went back and over the film, whether it's the switching, making sure that they stay home on their switches and communicate or whatnot. But there was definitely open perimeter opportunities for the Raptors that I think the Sixers need to eliminate so they don't have put themselves in a precarious situation like they were at the end of Game 2.
Yeah, and I know we were talking earlier, I was at the game the night that Jimmy Butler scored 53 against the Sixers, and that's kind of when, I think everybody kind of got introduced to him, and that's when I was like, man, this guy's awesome. He is a big game guy. The interesting part about that I researched, Michael, was he scored 53 in that game. You know what he scored the next night? 4. So he has a propensity to have these big games. He did it against the Nets where he had 38, and then the next game he kind of didn't do much. He has a propensity to have these monster games and then kind of goes away for whatever reason. And I'm not knocking him. My point is, I don't know that you get big game James Butler, even though he doesn't want to be called James. I don't know that you get a big game out of him, which means somebody else has to step it up tonight.
Yeah, don't call him James, Mike Gill.
No.
He'll get angry with you. But, no, I totally agree. And it's not a knock on Jimmy either, but I think that's, when you're talking about the tier of superstars in the NBA, Jimmy is that second tier. He's not, you don't say LeBron, Jimmy Butler, and Kevin Durant. You say LeBron, KD, Kawhi, and Jimmy's that second tier. And I think what you just said is a big reason because of that. He has the ability to, on any given night, to be the best player on the floor, take over on both ends of the floor. But you don't necessarily see that every single night like you do in, some of the top absolute, top level players in this league. So, and I don't think that the Sixers, like you said, I don't think that the Sixers can rely on that. I think the thing you can rely on with Jimmy is if you get him and the team to the fourth quarter in a close game, at that point you can rely on him. But I don't think he's the type of guy you can go into a game with a game plan saying, all right, Jimmy, we're going to ride you for, 25 shots and we need you to put up 30 points. I don't think that's a game plan for success, and I don't think that's necessarily what the Sixers are going to do. I definitely expect Joel to be more of a focal point, and obviously Ben and Tobias both need to, step up their production as well.
Now, what do you make of Joel's comments? He essentially acknowledges that, hey, I can't force stuff. I got to be able to, if I have to score, he wants to be patient offensively. If I only have to score 15, and then I'm only going to score 15. So is that a recipe for success, or do we need to see Joel Embiid in the 30s?
No, I think it's a recipe for success, Mike. I definitely don't want to see him force things. I think that, if he is able to concentrate a little bit more of his energy defensively and let, work so hard offensively and let it come to him a little bit more, I think that's a benefit from the thing that would benefit the Sixers the most if he's able to be really active on the defensive end, both chasing Pascal around again and also being able to double back as a rim protector on drives against guys like Kyle Lowry and Kawhi. And then offensively, I think it's important that they establish him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they establish him as a guy that's taking 20 shots. I think if he's getting the ball in the post, that's going to make Toronto double. That's going to switch their shift their defense. And then if he can get the ball out from there, take advantages of mismatches, things like that, more pick his spots, which is I think what he was getting at in those comments, more so than just, all right, Joel, we're going to force feed you the ball in the post and we want you to take 30 shots.
What about all right, so Joel essentially it sounds like anyway, has been instructed to not shoot threes. I mean, is that where we're at right now, where we feel like they've said, do not shoot threes, or is he policing himself? Whatever it is, he's not pulling the trigger on the three as nearly as often, which is fine, but it seems that the Raptors are now either giving him that shot and he's not taking it, and or he's got that pump fake that nobody's buying. So when he catches that ball at the 3-point line, does he need to do something different?
Well, I think that I would like to see him less on the 3-point line in general, which kind of goes back to me saying I'd like to see him established more in the post. Some of those touches and possessions where he's catching the ball at the top of the key and pump faking and trying to, either break someone down or go into the spin move or the back down. I'd rather see him just catching the ball, on the block or the high block to begin with. But second of all, I don't think it's a hard mandate I don't think Brett went up to him and said, Joel, don't shoot threes. But I think, they certainly don't encourage him to shoot a ton of threes, and he definitely does police himself. I think we see him shooting more threes when he tends to, when he's tired or games where he's not, necessarily in rhythm. He tends to settle a little bit more. I think when he thinks about it for a split second, he tries to, curtail his 3-point shooting. We remember earlier in the season when he said he doesn't like shooting threes necessarily. So I think in general, it's a combination of them telling him to and him policing himself. And I think the best, recipe for that would be, in certain situations, he needs to be out there if you're going to put Ben on, in the block and run things through him down low. But in general, I think the more you can get Joel in the post and away from the 3-point line on the offensive end, it's a better recipe for success.
Yeah, because it almost seems like either he's been instructed or it's in his mind that I'm not going to shoot the three, and then he's got that big ball fake that essentially nobody's buying, right? I mean, he just kind of throws it up, and it seems like that teams aren't buying it, and they're backing up, almost kind of like they defend Ben, like they're kind of sagging off of him, and then he comes into this big pile of mess in the middle of the lane.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, but I agree completely, and I feel like a lot of turnovers end up happening right there because he does go into that mess and he either gets stripped or he throws an elbow or a shoulder and draws the charge. Someone draws a charge on him. So I think that's the point where he's the most. It seems almost out of control at times offensively in that position because I think it is in his mind that he doesn't want to look at the box score at the end of the game and see that he shot 7 threes, 8 threes. He wants to keep it definitely down low. So I think that's something in his mind. And, definitely that pump fake, it was something that was working earlier in his career. I'm sure you remember, Mike, his rookie year when he was kind of shooting threes and catching people off guard. He was getting, drawing a lot of fouls on that pump fake or creating opportunities. But at this point, his shooting from out there has leveled off a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that the defenses don't quite respect it as much. So that, like you said, lets them sag off and then, results in turnovers.
All right, I want to get your opinion on a couple things. Embiid against Siakam. Do they go with that again tonight?
Yeah, at least to start out the game, I think that worked really well to begin with. I think they have to be prepared for, Toronto to throw some things offensively, whether it's, trying to take advantage of Marc Gasol on Tobias or trying to get, Siakam in more screener roles to get, Joel switched on whether it be Kyle or Kawhi or something like that. But, it worked well in Game 2. I think it's something that they'll, at least start out with and see how it goes in Game 3.
Yeah, Siakam was 6-17 in the 41 possessions that Embiid guarded him. This is from The Athletic. In game number 1, it was Harris and Butler on Siakam, and he had his way with those guys. By the way, Greg Monroe also defended Siakam and gave him some problems. He was 1 for 3 with a turnover. So I guess you anticipate seeing the center matchup against Siakam again, and then we'll see what they counter with in that spot. Do you anticipate I don't want to say a full night, but almost a full game again from Ben Simmons? In other words, another 45, 44-minute night where he's running around on Kawhi.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. They need him out there. And it might be another situation where, I think they need more from him offensively than 5 points. But I think that the emphasis of him from, the coaching standpoint and the game plan is to really go out there and be, as difficult as he can be on Kawhi. And if that means, a little bit more of that energy is spent on the defensive end, then so be it. But I do think we'll see Ben 40-plus minutes again and, a lot of that time being spent on Kawhi for sure.
Yeah, and then I guess the other one is the one that you mentioned before is Harris on Gasol. And, that one there, I don't think Harris got enough credit for, it wasn't publicized enough because Gasol didn't really do much. But that was part of the point is Gasol, and he didn't do much in game 1. It was the few opportunities he had. He capitalized on it, Michael. And we saw him as soon as Boban came in. They went right after that matchup, and Gasol hit a 3.
Yeah, and he still has the ability to do that, Mike. I think that Toronto probably wasn't expecting that necessarily to be the matchup and just didn't necessarily, they weren't game planned to take advantage of it, offensively as much. They kind of went back to the same thing they did in game 1 because it worked so well and the Sixers were able to kind of shut that down. Marc Gasol last game only had 5 points, 7 rebounds, 35 minutes. So, that's very solid work most of that time. A lot of that time, at least, was Tobias. But, like I said earlier, I think that's definitely something that Nick Nurse, I'm sure, saw and they might look to, exploit because Tobias, as good as he plays, Marc Gasol has that step back, much bigger body and that feathery touch. So, if they try to get him more touches in the post, they might have to, Brett might have to adjust that, depending how it goes.
If Jimmy doesn't have the big game, and we touched on this about, offensively a little bit earlier, but if they're calling plays to get somebody going, which guy, is Redick the guy that they want to try to, because he's been kind of hot and cold. He was streaky cold early in game 1 and then got streaky hot. He was kind of inconsequential in game number 2. Is he a guy you want to see them kind of get those transition screens and the rolls off of Embiid like we see a lot in the regular season? Or do you want to see them maybe get Tobias Harris going and show us that, hey, Tobias can carry us in a game if we need him?
Yeah, Mike, I think I'd rather see an emphasis be placed on Tobias, getting Tobias going, just because he can do more offensively. Like, JJ is always going to be a threat when he's out on the floor, and we know what he can do in terms of shooting. But Tobias is a guy that when he's feeling good, he can be a really good scorer for this team in terms of a guy that can not only catch and shoot like JJ from the perimeter, but can put the ball on the floor, has a nice pull up from the mid range, and can take all the way get to the rim too. And I think he's a guy that, at least since he's been at Philly, seems to play a lot on momentum. Not that he gets out of his game, but when he hits a couple shots early, gets a couple opportunities, that's, usually a good sign for him moving forward, as opposed to, some of the other games he's a little more quiet, his shots aren't falling. So I think if there's, an emphasis outside of getting Joel going, and obviously, Ben needs some more touches, but I think getting Tobias some looks early where he can, feel comfortable from the outside or the mid-range would be, definitely key.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. Sixers Raptors tonight. This series is interesting to me because of the futures of these teams. Butler, Tobias, JJ, all free agents. The Kawhi Leonard situation. Who is this series' future more important to?
That's a good question, Mike. I mean, I'll probably, outside of the Sixers, I think probably for Kawhi, just because it's so, he's so important to the Raptors right now, whereas, the Sixers have a lot of guys, to build a team around. Joel's locked up, Ben's locked up. You have to assume that at least one or the other of Jimmy or Tobias will probably be back, or, they have the money to get someone else. But the Raptors are in a situation where, they traded away their franchise guy to land, Kawhi for 1 year. If he leaves, they don't have a history of potentially drawing free agents. They don't have, tons of other assets in order to get another star. So I think, Kawhi leaving the Raptors after one season could really, set them back, a substantial amount. So I think his future is probably the most tied up in the outcome of this series.
All right. You got the one thing tonight, Kawhi Leonard, obviously. He had a monster game one, had a real big game two, but it wasn't as efficient as game number one. But you got to imagine that after a loss and 1, 2, 3 days off or 2 days off before tonight, I would imagine that Kawhi Leonard is going to come out and have a monster game tonight, right? I mean, he's going to have some kind of 40-point game, so he's going to be tough to slow down. But the guy that I want to get your thoughts on is Siakam, and we talked about defending him here, but if the Sixers can figure out a way to shut him down, does the rest of the team scare you at all? Is there a third guy that you would say, look, if the Sixers figured out Siakam, that maybe Nurse goes and leans on this guy tonight? Does that guy exist for them?
I think, in theory, that guy would be Kyle Lowry, who, has potential to make plays, but I don't think it would be a situation where you're necessarily scared. I think Raptors showed in game one that, when they're at their best, so much of that is going through their two forwards. Kawhi 45 that game, Pascal 29 in that game one, and that just made them, so much more deadly. Kawhi's one of those guys, like you said, like no matter what, Ben could do a great job, and I thought he did a really good job in game two, and Kawhi still put up numbers. He's one of those guys like a Kevin Durant, LeBron, like you could do as good as you want. You're not going to stop him from getting numbers. But I think that if, you can make life difficult on him, and then if Joel can do a similar job on Pascal, which I think he can, Pascal is a great player. I'm not taking anything away from him, but he's, kind of a meteoric riser. He's, in category of potentially winning the best, most improved player this year. He hasn't really been tested on the big stage yet, past this season. So I think there's potential for, if Joel can get him rattled, the Raptors really don't have that, like you said, that third guy. It would be, Kyle Lowry, but he's shown, propensity to, be inconsistent in the playoffs. And I don't think, the Sixers have guys to throw at him, whether it be Tobias or Jimmy, or, they have length to put on him. So I just don't see it, Mike. If the Sixers are able to limit and contain, Kawhi and Pascal like they did in game two, I think that puts them in, a really good position.
Yeah, Lowry's interesting because he's had such playoff failures. He hasn't been awful in the playoffs, but I mean, he's not the same player that he is, when he's in the regular season. He's an all-star. He's been an all-star, but he just doesn't seem like he's had the same impact here. So it'll be interesting to see. He's from Philly. He comes back to Philly if he has a big game tonight. Because for me, Michael, if they could figure out a way to keep Siakam in check like they did the other night, you got to feel pretty good about moving forward. But they gave up 89 points the other night. I would imagine that they're not. And here's another thing. Now, coming home might be interesting about whether they can play with that same level of defensive intensity. Because after that net game in Game 5, I had said if they can play defense at that level, man, they can make it to the finals with that level of defense. They just don't know if you can bring it. But if you were going to bring it, having 2 days off would help you get there.
Yeah, and I think coming home, too, would have to help you get there. Obviously,
having 2 days off and coming home, right.
Yeah, right. Those, if anything's going to translate, you would think it would be those things. And the potential that this team is getting healthier. You have to think maybe Joel is feeling a little bit better than he was in Game 2. Mike Scott's potential, his status is still up in the air, but him coming back. So,
you think he'll play tonight?
It's tough to say. I think so. I said,
don't you think, though, the clue, they don't let injured guys talk, and he spoke the other day.
That was one thing, and he was out at practice, in view, playing like 3-on-3. I think he's going to play. Obviously I don't want to rush him, but they also don't want to, wait too long to get him back. So my gut feeling is yes, but I'll be interested to see. And if he comes back, that's just, another tool, especially defensively for Brett Brown to use.
No doubt. And I wonder what that does to the rotations with Ennis. And I would imagine Greg Monroe's still in the rotation now all of a sudden.
Yeah, I'd be interested if Mike's available. I'd be interested to see, if Brett would go small with Mike as a, potentially a small ball 5, or if my guess is he'll probably go back to Greg Monroe. It's one of those things as, it worked out in game 2, try it again in Game 3.
Yeah. All right. Tonight, 8 o'clock, a lot of matchups, a lot of chess pieces. The next chess move is Nick Nurse's. We'll see what he comes up with here. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. Follow him for the Sixers and the Raptors. And, of course, we'll have it for you live with Tom McGinnis at 8 o'clock here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Michael, I will see you Sunday.
All right, Mike, sounds good. Have a good night, man.
All right, man, take care. Sunday, Sixers 3:30 on South Jersey Sixers Station, 97.3 ESPN.